All right, y'all hear me okay? All right, if I step away right here, can you guys hear me okay? Yes? Okay, fabulous. I like to walk around. So I'm so glad to see you guys, because we get to talk about what actually happened here at the Battle of San Jacinto. This is especially exciting for me because I grew up in Houston, and I remember my first time at San Jacinto was in 1986 at the sesquicentennial. I have a really hard time saying that. But I was a little kid. I was really excited because they had Sam Houston's army, and I got to run around with the tents, and I had this little wooden gun, and I thought it was amazing. But I had no idea what actually happened at San Jacinto, like none whatsoever. My fourth grade and then my seventh grade Texas history teachers were amazing people. They did a really good job, but mostly they just said, and they won at San Jacinto, and that's it. And I remember thinking, there's got to be more to this story. And so I went off and had my own historical career. I'm a historian now at UNT up in Denton, Texas. And I work on a lot of things, but I work especially on Texas. And I'm really excited to talk to you guys about what happened at the Battle of San Jacinto. So let's see if the clicker's working here. It is. Oh, here we go. Here we go. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of background, how we get to San Jacinto, and then the battle itself. All right? And so the road to San Jacinto really begins with the fall of the Alamo. All right? March 6, 1836. And in the aftermath of the fall of the Alamo, where's the clicker? Let's go to the next slide, please. Here we go. Santa Anna is obviously in San Antonio right here. He's besieged the Alamo. And the rest of Texas is kind of a hot mess. I think is the best way to put this, all right? Texans are divided amongst themselves. They're not quite sure what to do until Santa Anna marches into Texas, besieges the Alamo, and they start getting their act together. They meet at Washington on the Brazos right here on early March and declare independence March 2nd, 1836. When they do that, which by the way, March 2nd is also Sam Houston's birthday, they name Sam Houston Commander-in-Chief of the Texan armies, which is lovely, except there really is no Texas army for him to command. It's a real bit of a problem for him, all right? There were the 200 in the Alamo. There's about 400 guys down here around Goliad, but it's all scattered everywhere. So Houston's first job, next slide, please, he rides with three guys. It's him and two other guys. There's three guys that ride to Gonzales to build an army, all right? So they get to Gonzales. He finds 300 guys there. They're going to go ride, hopefully, to save the Alamo, but that's when he gets news that the Alamo has fallen, all right? And suddenly, the landscape changes almost immediately for Sam Houston and for the Texas Army. Next slide. There's also another army, which we usually forget about. We know about Santa Anna over here. There's a second army down here under the command of Jose de Urrea, right here, who's coming up along the coast. And Houston quickly realizes he's in trouble. He's got 300 guys. Santa Anna is reputed to have up to 5,000 or 6,000, all right? And Urrea is coming up the coast right here toward Goliad, which is where another 400 Texans are. This is a bad situation. And while a lot of the 300 with Houston and Gonzales would love to attack Santa Anna at this moment, Houston recognizes that's a great way to just lose everything and lose Texas. So Houston decides that he's got to retreat. He sends word down to Goliad here, where James Fannin is in charge. He tells Fannin, retreat, fall back so we can join up our armies and be stronger and be more able to deal with whatever Santa Anna brings. Unfortunately, Fannin waits a little bit too long to retreat. And he and the 400 get captured down here in Goliad. They'll later be executed by Urrea under orders of Santa Anna. And so Sam Houston has to build an army essentially from scratch. So he starts retreating. He makes his way back to the Colorado River. There we go. Eventually past the Brazos River right here. Santa Anna starts pursuing. He sends out some people ahead of himself. He then joins them. Man, that's quicker. And then Urrea starts moving up the coast. And you can see there's this wave of people moving all of this direction. Houston retreating, the Mexican army in two different columns making their way east. And while that's happening, Texans are learning about all of this stuff. Most Texans weren't in the army. Most Texans were back at home, all right? But they hear news of the fall of the Alamo or the destruction of the soldiers at Goliad, and it terrifies them. And when Houston keeps retreating, they're afraid that there's nothing standing between them and Santa Anna's oncoming army. So they retreat. They abandon their homes. This is called the runaway scrape. Right? People by the thousands throw whatever they've got into saddlebags, into wagons, and they take off on these muddy roads. And the roads really were muddy like this. The spring of 1836 was unseasonably wet. It was raining constantly. It was cold. This was a really hard situation. People were getting mired with their wagons. They're up to their knees in mud. It's a horrible situation as people are trying to get away as refugees from the oncoming army. They tend to focus their anger on Sam Houston. And I want to emphasize this for a second. Most of these refugees feel like the reason this is a problem is because Houston keeps retreating. If he'd turn around and fight, this won't be a problem. And everyone's trying to get Houston to turn around and fight. The refugees are yelling at him. His own soldiers are rebelling in some cases against him. The interim president of Texas at the time, David Burnett, sends him a letter saying, quote, "The enemy are laughing you, Houston, to scorn. You must fight them. You must retreat no farther. The country expects you to fight. The salvation of the country depends on you doing so." And I say all this to point out something I think really important about what happens at San Jacinto. To get to San Jacinto, Houston has to withstand an enormous amount of pressure to turn around at every moment and just fight with whoever he's got at that moment. And he could have done that. And he probably would have lost. And Houston knew that. But we also tend to think of Houston and people like that as these marble figures of history. They're real human beings, like you and I, flesh and blood. And he felt that pressure. So I love this letter he wrote to a friend of his, Thomas Rusk, saying, this is Houston talking. "You know I'm not easily depressed, but before my God, since we parted, I have found the darkest hours of my past life. My excitement has been so great that for 48 hours I have not eaten an ounce, nor have I slept." These things weigh on Houston, and he perseveres, as his soldiers persevere, as they make their way east and push their way forward. All right, what is Houston waiting for? He's waiting for an opportunity, and what he's really waiting for is for Santa Anna to make a mistake. And Santa Anna does. Santa Anna, when he gets up to the Brazos River, he gets across, and he decides Houston's probably not going to fight, so I'm going to stop chasing him. The way to end this war, Santa Anna decides, is to capture the Texas government itself. So Santa Anna surges ahead after the Texas government, all right? And he heads almost all the way to Galveston. He goes to a place called New Washington eventually. And Santa Anna does this quickly, and the way he can get away fast is that Santa Anna takes off with a smaller contingent of his army, a smaller portion of his army that he is heading, and he moves out forward. This is the opportunity that Houston's been waiting for Santa Anna to isolate himself or whatever Santa Anna was going to do. But this opens a door for Houston to not attack the entire Mexican army, but just a portion of it. And Houston learns about this on April 18th, because this is one of those amazing things that happens during the Texas Revolution. Some of Houston's scouts capture a Mexican messenger who is carrying Santa Anna's mail. And when they get Santa Anna's mail, there's messages in there between the commanders saying exactly where Santa Anna is, exactly how many soldiers he has. And Houston reads this, and he's like, oh my goodness, I know exactly what he's going to do. He's isolated with a smaller portion of men. All I need to do is attack him and capture him, and then we can possibly win this thing. But the best part of all of this is he found out, he found out exactly where Santa Anna was going. Santa Anna was going here, where we are, at San Jacinto, which nobody at the time called San Jacinto, all right? This place where we are had no name yet. It was basically known as Lynch's Ferry, all right? There's a little ferry, which is still in operation, by the way. It's been operating since the early 1820s, all right? One of the most continually operated ferries in North America. You should go across it. It's really neat, all right? But that ferry was right here, and that's where Santa Anna was going to be heading. He was going to come up this road. Oops, darn it. All right, we can do this. He's going to be coming up this road right here, and he's going to go to this ferry heading that direction. Houston knows this. Houston's not that far away. And so Houston decides that his best bet is that he's going to make his way now directly towards Santa Anna, directly toward Lynch's Ferry. He wants to get here first to cut off Santa Anna. So it's a race to Lynch's Ferry, except Santa Anna doesn't know it's a race. Only Houston knows it's a race. and he's going to move as fast as he possibly can. So he races here. He gets here on April 20th, which, by the way, that's today. Today is April 20th. It's not 1836, but it's April 20th. April 20th, 1836. The Texas Army gets here first. They've been marching overnight. At dawn, they march in, and they get here before Santa Anna's army. They march all the way to the ferry and check it out. Look around. No Santa Anna. Yay, we won! And now that they're here first, they can set up the best spot to defend from it, all right? So they decide they're not going to defend down here because it's real marshy, low land, a really bad spot to set up, all right? So they back up about a half a mile this direction, all right? And they come back, so here's Lynch's Ferry. They come back this direction, and then there's a higher bank right here along Buffalo Bayou, all right? And there's a whole bunch of trees. That's where Sam Houston sets up his camp for a couple reasons. Okay, one, it's higher up ground, it's going to be healthier. Two, it's in the trees. That is the best place they can possibly be because it provides perfect cover for them. It will also make it hard for Santa Anna if you want to do a cavalry charge. You can't do that against a grove of trees very easily, so they're going to be a good set position. But best of all, Santa Anna's marching in along this road right here. This is the New Washington Road. He's coming from New Washington, which is right near the coast right there. And it's coming up this way right here, and it's going to go right smack to where the Texans are. Santa Anna can't avoid them. He can't get around them. He's going to march directly to them. That's the plan. So they march in, they set up, they have breakfast because they've got some time on their hands, and they wait. All right? Around 11 o'clock, Santa Anna arrives, and the forward guard of his troops march up about 11 o'clock or so. They come up the road right here. When they crest a little hill right here, they can see, there they are, the Texans. They're in the woods. And Santa Anna thinks, this is fantastic. He loves the situation because he sees Houston. He goes, that idiot set up right in front of the water. He either has to fight or jump in the water. This is good for me, Santa Anna. So Santa Anna thinks this is a terrific position. So he moves up a little bit closer. And then he decides, well, I can't attack until I know how many troops Houston has. He doesn't know how many troops Sam Houston has at his disposal. He can't really see them in the trees. So Santa Anna decides to send a cavalry unit up here to try to draw the Texans out. Basically, puts an easy bait out there, and hopefully they'll come out of the woods, and I can assess how many guys are there. All right? So he sends up a cavalry unit this direction. Houston is not messing around, and he pulls out his artillery, the two cannons known as the Twin Sisters, pulls them out to the edge of the oaks, and then he fires them off at Santa Anna's cavalry unit, which immediately skedaddles back this way. All right? So Santa Anna, in return, brings up the one cannon he's got with him, El Volcan, the volcano. Click, click, click. By the way, I just love how they name things like this. I want to name my car the Volcano. This would be just fantastic. All right. Anyway, so he brings up the volcano, and these two sides, and if you saw the reenactment earlier, they talked about this. They just kind of fire at each other for a few hours. They don't really do a lot of damage. There's a few horses killed on the Texas side, a few mules killed on the Mexican side. The commander of the Texan artillery, John Neal, he takes a bad wound. But basically, not much happens until about 3 in the afternoon when Santa Anna decides, okay, we're done for now. I don't know what's going to happen, but he's going to back off a little bit and set up some sort of camp. It doesn't look like there's going to be a fight today, according to Santa Anna. So he retreats, there we go, heads back that direction. And so the Texans are like, yay! There's one Texan in particular, all right, named Sidney Sherman. Let me get him up here. Oh, there we go. We'll get back to you in a second. Sidney Sherman, who I would argue is one of the more boisterous of Sam Houston's officers. This guy wants a fight, and he wants a fight right now. In fact, he would have preferred a fight about a month ago, but he's here, we're at San Jacinto, and he's on the attack. And he can see they didn't move the cannon back, all right? El Volcano is just sitting right there. Why don't we go take that? So he goes to Sam Houston and says, why don't you just give me permission to take a cavalry unit out there, and we'll go capture this cannon, and then it'll be ours. And Houston says, that's not a good idea, all right? Because what Houston says, he doesn't want an all-out fight right now. They're not ready. They're not in position. He hasn't prepared for this. So if we go attack that cannon, it'll be an all-out brawl, and maybe we'll win, but maybe we won't. Let's get positioned instead. And so Sherman doesn't like this, so they go back and forth. Eventually, Houston says, okay, Sherman, here's the deal. You can get together some cavalrymen, and you can't attack, but you can go out here and scout Santa Anna's position. Tell us the situation, basically. Where are they camped? How many do they have? All that sort of stuff. So Sherman says, fantastic. And so he asks for volunteers, which it was not hard to get volunteers. The Texas soldiers are chomping at the bit to be a part of this fight. All right? But he asks for volunteers. He gets 70 guys together. They get mounted up, and Sherman marches them out or rides them out. He's supposed to scout, right? What is he not supposed to do? Start a fight. What does Sherman try to do as soon as he clears the tree line? Start a fight. He charges. Literally as soon as they get out of the tree line, they just charge. They get in battle formation, charge head on towards the cannon. Woo! All right? What does the Mexican army do? They start shooting at him. Yes, exactly. And here's the thing. The Mexican cavalry, all right, is very well armed, all right, with these massive lances, all right? They are incredibly good on horseback. And the Texans, while very brave, are running around with muzzle-loading muskets. So after you fire from horseback with your muzzle-loading musket, what must you do for that musket to be useful again? Or rifle, I'm sorry. Get off your horse and reload. Guess who's an easy target for the Mexican cavalry when you get off your horse and go, hold on a second. Just give me a minute. We got this. All right, get back up on my horse. All right, it didn't go well. They charge in, these guys charge out, Sherman and his men reload, get back on their horses, charge a second time. This time the Mexican infantry comes out, and so the artillery is firing at them, the cavalry is firing at them, the infantry is firing at them. It's a bit of a mess. So I recreated this for you in PowerPoint. You ready for it? There's Sherman, and here's what happens to Sherman. Right? I'm not taking anything away from Sherman. He's an incredibly brave officer. All right? He plays a big role the next day. But it doesn't go well, and several Texans almost get killed in this whole process, and then Sherman has to basically back off as fast as he can. The Mexican cavalry backs off, click, and then they move the cannon back over to this area over here. And that's basically the end of the fighting on April 20th. It didn't accomplish much, but both sides are chomping at the bit, all right? Then they go to sleep. It's nighttime. The Texan camp beds down. Santa Anna's camp is a hive of activity overnight. And at dawn the next morning, April 21st, 1836, all right, everybody's expecting a fight almost immediately, all right? Now, as dawn breaks, Santa Anna is exhausted because he has been up all night. Why? Because he was having his men build a breastworks in front of there, basically barricades in front of his camp's position. They were piling high saddles and brush and boxes and all kinds of stuff to try to make an artificial barricade, essentially, that they could be behind, because he was expecting the Texans to attack at any moment, probably because Sherman charged his cannon wildly the day before, right? He's expecting a fight. And so he'd been up all night. His men had been up all night. They're exhausted, all right? So is Houston, all right? Houston's exhausted. He's been up all night as well. Most of his men actually went to sleep pretty well. They were, by all accounts, they'd gotten a good night's sleep. But Houston had been up all night planning, and then at dawn, he went to sleep with orders to not be woken for a few hours. So as the dawn breaks, no one's quite sure what's about to happen. But I want to emphasize, Santa Anna's army is in position, all right? They are ready for whatever's coming next, expecting a charge at any moment, which I think it's kind of hilarious that Houston is literally sleeping through that at that particular moment, all right? But Houston gets awoken not too long after, because around 9-something in the morning, some new Mexican soldiers come marching in under the command of Martin Prefecto de Cos, right here, who was one of the many officers that Santa Anna had on the Brazos River, but had been summoned to bring in more troops. And this is before Santa Anna thought he was going to encounter Houston's army at San Jacinto. He sent this order a while ago. But Cos finally makes it at the perfect moment. He brings in 400 troops. And he comes in about 9 in the morning, and he's coming in along this road right here, which is, by the way, the same road that Houston's army had come in on. Comes in this way, sees Houston's army, swings wildly out here, and makes his way over to Santa Anna. All right? See? Love PowerPoint. That's my very bad animation of that. All right? So he comes over here, and I want to emphasize, the whole Texas camp saw this. They're eating breakfast going, what is happening over there? These guys are just marching in like they own the place. 400 new soldiers are coming in to join Santa Anna's army over here, right? And that matters because you can imagine numbers in these situations matter enormously, right? So Houston has 930 men. He actually thinks he only has 780, so he's undercounting his own men. And Santa Anna had about 850 men. So you can see they're pretty evenly matched when they get to San Jacinto. But when you add 400 more troops, and I'm a historian, I'm bad at math, all right? But I used a calculator for this. That brings his total up to 1,250 men, all right? Now we've got a bit of an imbalance here, right? There's a difference here that could possibly matter when it comes to the actual fight. And so for Houston, he recognizes that the power imbalance has shifted now towards Santa Anna. Santa Anna feels a little bit more confident, all right? But these men are also exhausted. The guys who got there had marched all night. They hadn't eaten a thing. They hadn't slept in forever. They come in, they're kind of dead on their feet. So those guys go take a nap for a little bit. The rest of the guys, I want to emphasize again, stay in battle formation, ready for a fight at any moment. So if you're in the Mexican lines, they're just waiting at any time. This is going to keep coming, all right? Meanwhile, Houston's trying to figure out what are we going to do given this set of reinforcements. Around midday or so, around noon, Houston has a war council, all right? One of the only ones he has during the entire campaign. He brings together his officers where they have a discussion about, okay, guys, what should we do? Do we attack Santa Anna or do we wait to be attacked? That was the question, all right? And almost everybody, with just one guy saying differently, but almost everybody said, wait to be attacked. We're not going to attack, which always confuses my students because they know what happens is if the Texans attack. But the reason is because Houston and all of them say, well, if he's been reinforced over here, running across a mile of open prairie is a great way to get shot down. But if we stay in the trees where we have great defensive opportunities, we'll be in a good position. Everyone thinks there's going to be a fight. The question is who's going to attack who? And both sides are waiting for the other one to start. Does that make sense? So they agree we're going to wait to be attacked. But the problem with waiting, of course, is that Santa Anna potentially could get more reinforcements if you wait. So Houston has to make a decision. What do I do about that? Because they cannot afford for another 400 troops to come marching in on behalf of Santa Anna. So what Houston decides to do is to destroy the nearby bridge over Vince's Bayou, all right? 8 miles away, there is a bridge that you have to cross a bayou to get over here to San Jacinto at the time. That's the only road that's basically coming in. That's how Houston's army had gotten here. That is how Koss had gotten here. Any more reinforcements for Santa Anna most assuredly would come that same way. So it's time to destroy that bridge. So he sends his favorite scout, Erastus, who went by Deaf, Smith. He actually had a childhood illness, which is what caused him hearing loss. And back in the 1830s, that's what they would use nicknames like Deaf. But he was by far the most prized scout in the Texas Army. And he was sent with 6 other men to go destroy this bridge. So Houston dispatches Smith. He goes this way towards Vince's Bridge, riding, hell-bent for leather as fast as they can, this direction over here, about 8 miles. They get out there. They destroy the bridge. It's a cedar bridge, and it was actually hard to knock this thing down. They tried setting it on fire, but that didn't work, so they just start chopping at it for a little while, and eventually, you can see right here, they're pulling it down. But they burn it, they chop it, they smash it, they declare war on this bridge. Eventually, they get this thing down, and that was a magnificent moment for this entire campaign. Because not only can now Santa Anna not get reinforcements, but now the Texans cannot retreat. It's all or nothing, baby. It's all going to happen here, all right? So these guys turn around and come riding back as fast as they possibly can. Meanwhile, Santa Anna is confused about what's going on. His men, since daybreak, have been doing what? Waiting for an attack that doesn't seem to come. It didn't come at dawn. It didn't come at 10 a.m. Koss came at 10 a.m., but the Texans didn't come at 10 a.m. Didn't come at noon. Didn't come at 1. Didn't come at 2. It does not seem to be coming today. Meanwhile, his men are exhausted. absolutely exhausted. Coss's men arrived dead on their feet. But these guys who marched in the day before from New Washington, who have been constructing all night this barricade, who've been in that fight earlier the previous day and have been standing in position this entire time, have not slept worth anything, have not eaten almost anything. They're just in constant wait mode. So Santa Anna decides, he's looking across, there's nothing happening in the Texas camp. So he says to himself, I guess they're not going to attack. So strategically, Santa Anna decides, okay, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to attack them tomorrow. His plan was to attack early in the pre-dawn darkness on April 22nd. But to do that, his men needed to rest and actually eat something. So it was a very strategic decision. He told his men to stand down, all right? Now, when I was a kid taking 7th grade Texas history, my teacher, the one thing she did tell us is that they took a nap. And I was like, why take a nap now? It makes no sense. And it's one of those things that I think it's become almost mythology. But the reality was they were told to stand down, and it was a strategic military decision, all right, to try to prepare for the next day, for the fight that was going to happen then. This seemed an opportune moment. And honestly, it would have been if that was not somehow, miraculously, the exact same moment when Houston suddenly decided, okay, we're going to attack. It's just one of those amazing timing things that if Houston hadn't done that, that probably would have been a brilliant decision by Santa Anna. But because Houston does decide what he does, it is the worst decision Santa Anna makes this entire campaign, and it makes, in many ways, the difference at this particular moment, all right? So while the Mexican camp, and by the way, Houston didn't know the Mexican camp was standing down. He has no idea that that's happening. He's decided that now is our moment, and we must attack. And so at 3:30 in the afternoon on April 21st, 1836, one of the most seminal moments in Texas history because of what happens here and the effects that it has on North America. At that moment, Sam Houston starts lining up his men out just in front of the oak grove here. There's a little depression in the ground right there. So I want to emphasize, there's a kind of a dip right over there where they line up. And then going this way, you can't see it on this map, the land rises pretty significantly. All right, where we are here in the San Jacinto Monument is about right here on this map. And it is the highest point on the hill. That's why they put the monument here, because when the bayou flooded, they didn't want to stain the monument. So that's why it's up where it is in terms of height. But all of that made it hard for anybody over here to see the Texans getting in position, all right? Santa Anna had lookouts posted. He had sentries keeping an eye out. He wasn't being stupid. But they couldn't see these guys very well all the way a mile across. And so as they're lining up, they're getting into position. Sidney Sherman, he's over here on the Texas left, all right? The cavalry's over here on the right. There are Tejanos, which are Mexicans native to Texas, as a part of this army. Two of the most famous examples are Juan Seguin, a real hero of the Texas Revolution, and Antonio Menchaca. Both of whom have been a part of Houston's entire march towards San Jacinto. Seguin had actually been in the Alamo. He was one of the messengers out of the Alamo. He survives that by being a messenger out, and he's a part of the Texas Army. They were not supposed to fight at San Jacinto. Houston didn't want them to be in the fight, not because he didn't trust them, not because he didn't think they were good soldiers. He was afraid his other men might kill them accidentally in the heat of battle. So Houston had ordered the Tejanos, which was about 20 of them or so in the army. He orders them to guard the baggage and guard the horses. And these guys are having none of that. Like, I didn't march this far. I didn't go through everything we've gone through. This is as much my fight as it is yours. That's what they say to Sam Houston. They weren't going to be left out. And they literally go to Sam Houston's tent, which, by the way, can you imagine how hard it would be to get into the general's tent at the moment before the fight, basically? But they say, you're not leaving us out. And they demand to be a part of this fight. And Houston says, okay, you guys come in. And they put white cards in their hats to help differentiate them. But they line up with all the other Texans. And then about somewhere between 3:30 and 4 p.m., we're not exactly sure the exact moment. Nobody had an atomic clock with them. But roughly approaching 4 o'clock, Texans in position with their two cannons basically at the center right here, with Sam Houston on a gray horse right in front, start making their way across this field. 1 mile of open prairie with grass basically up to your waist, all right? And as they're coming along, this is the hard part to imagine. It's eerily silent. All right? They're not making noise. They're making their way across quietly. Can you imagine 1,000 men doing this? With adrenaline pumping through them in every which way. This is the moment that they have been waiting for, that they've been fighting for, literally and figuratively, making their way across as they're running this direction right here. What's the most amazing thing is none of Santa Anna's sentries see them coming, somehow. And so as they're moving this direction here, it is Sherman, who Sherman, as I said, is chomping at the bit for a fight. His men are going faster than anybody. And they make their way through these trees over this direction, and they're the first ones to engage Santa Anna's lines on Santa Anna's far right, the Texan far left. They come in over here, and they're about 100 yards out when they open fire on Santa Anna's troops. And Santa Anna's troops are not in battle formation, all right? They're by cooking fires. Or some of them are resting, some of them are asleep. They're spread out. The cavalry had taken their saddles off their horses and let them graze. They are not ready for anything. Just all of a sudden the Texans pop out of the woods, start firing at them. Pandemonium ensues. All right? Explosions happen right here. No one here knows what's happening. Immediately after that, the cavalry under Mirabeau Lamar comes swinging in over here on this side. And then you hear it screaming on both sides. The Mexican cavalry is spread out because their horses get spread out very quickly. And everybody here scrambles every which way, but they don't know where to go, because they don't know quite what's happening. It's absolute chaos. And at that moment, the middle part right here, these two regiments come over the hill. They're being led by Sam Houston, who they're pulling the cannons with them. When they reach the top of the hill, which is basically right where we are right now, they're 200 yards from Santa Anna's lines. They open fire with the cannon, the twin sisters. Boom, boom. And then the fight is on. Sam Houston leads the men down right over here. They run into position, and they're about to fire. Meanwhile, on this side, the Mexican officers and soldiers come up against the barricades, and they lean their muskets right over the barricades, which are 4 feet high, and they fire too high. Big volley goes right over the Texan's head. One guy said if you put your hat up, you would have caught 20 bullets. All right? That gives the Texans an opportunity to then form their lines, and they fire a volley. Boom. Now, in 19th century military tactics, what you were supposed to do at this moment was to stop, reload, and wait for the command. Were the Texans a well-orchestrated, trained group of soldiers at San Jacinto? No. Did they wait for the next command? No. What did they do? Ah! And they charged like unhinged wild men. I mean, literally, they charged the barricades and come smashing over them. If they had stopped and reloaded, it might have given Santa Anna's army enough time to organize itself in some useful way. But because they didn't, because they flew over these barricades, ran through them, they start smashing everything to pieces, and it scatters Santa Anna's army in ways they could never organize themselves for any kind of meaningful defense. All right? And so these guys come flying over, and they're not reloading their guns. They're swinging their rifles like giant clubs. They're pulling out Bowie knives and tomahawks, and they're cutting and slashing and smashing everything that moves and everybody they can get their hands on. It's a horrible scene. I just want to emphasize this. This is actual war, all right? Not a cartoon, and it's not a fantasy. It is actual bloody, horrific, hand-to-hand combat that is happening in this area. And a lot of the Mexican soldiers and officers do their very best to try to organize some kind of defense. There's none to be had. It's just they're overrun. There's no organizing themselves in any which way they possibly can. And so within about 18 minutes, which again, I was like, who had a stopwatch? It's amazing. But according to Houston, after about 18 minutes, the fighting is over, and they've overtaken Santa Anna's camp. They're in control of that. Santa Anna's army is scattered. They're running every which direction. The Battle of San Jacinto is over in 18 minutes. Surprise carries the day. But the killing continues. And the killing continues for hours and hours and hours after that. All right? So as Santa Anna's camp is scattered every which direction, the soldiers and his army just start running every which way they possibly can. And every which way they're running is away from the Texans. So they start running back this direction right here. And what's behind them, and this is where Santa Anna gets criticized after the war by a lot of his officers, is a huge marshland swamp area that's called a lot of things: Boggy Bayou, Peggy's Lake, all these areas right here. It's just horrible muck. And it's made all the worse because what has it been doing for the spring of 1836? Raining constantly. So what was a muddy muck is now a sea of water and mush. And so the Mexican soldiers come running back this way. Most of them throw down their weapons and throw them any which direction they can. And are just throwing their hands up and surrendering or trying to surrender as best they can. But people are not taking their surrenders. Right? People are coming in, smashing heads, stabbing people, shooting them, even people surrendering, even people with their hands up. Because there's this pent-up angst and anger about the entire experience up to here, the massacre at the Alamo, the defeat of the Alamo, the massacre at Goliad, all these things, these pent-up emotions, the weeks of marching, the waiting, the tension, and the anger come flowing out at this particular moment. And the results are just violently horrific, all right? A lot of officers tried to stop the killing, like Sam Houston. The commanding general of the Texans tries to get his men to stop killing people. We've already won. And by this point, I mean, Houston's been shot off 2 horses. He got shot off his original horse on the first charge. He gets up on a second horse, later gets shot off of that, and has his ankle shattered in the process. He's on his 3rd horse at this point, riding around saying, "Stop! We won! Let's regather." Partly because Houston's afraid if there's another reinforcement for Santa Anna that shows up, we're going to be scattered to the winds and unable to respond to that. He's worried strategically as much as anything else. They completely ignore him. And I say that to say a few things. The main one being, he has no control over his men at this point. It is pure emotion that is running all of this at this point. And other Texan officers are trying also very hard to try to control the chaos and are unsuccessful. I'm trying to click here. Here we go. Like Moses Austin Bryan, who was a nephew of Stephen F. Austin. He was much younger. He's about 20 years old at the time. So this is him from an older or later period, I should say. But there was Moses Austin Bryan was appalled at the amount of killing that was happening. There was a Mexican drummer boy who was about 10 years old who had both his legs broken. He was laying on the ground, and he was trying to get away and protect himself. And Moses Austin Bryan tried to protect this kid, but another Texan ran up and shot the kid in the head and then just ran on as a part of all of this. John Austin Wharton, another officer in the Army, tried to save a Mexican officer who had thrown down his weapon by pulling that officer up on his horse so that you couldn't kill him because he's up there with Wharton. But when he pulled him up on his horse, another Texan came up there with his gun and just shot the guy off the back of the horse and killed him anyway. The worst of this, or the most prolific, I should say, of this, happened right here, all right, at the edge of all of this. Because as Mexican soldiers came running into this marshland area right here, they'd get stuck, and they'd thrown down their weapons, and they try to be swimming through some of the worst of all the stuff. And the Texans could stand on the shoreline and just calmly pick them off one at a time because they had all the time in the world, and they could aim as easily as they wanted to. Lieutenant Colonel named Pedro Delgado from Santa Anna's Army, who somehow does survive all of this, says that is where the worst of the carnage happened. So it's all behind the San Jacinto monument today. If you go over that direction, that marshland over there, that's where most of that killing and a lot of that ended up happening. So Wharton here, he kept trying to end all of this. He came up to here and he ordered the men, because he's an officer, he ordered the men to stop shooting defenseless soldiers as they're getting away. And one of the soldiers turns to him, a guy named Joe Dixon, and tells Wharton, "If Jesus Christ were to come down from heaven and order me to quit shooting Sandinistas, I wouldn't do it, sir." And then he cocks his rifle while looking at Wharton, daring him to do anything about it. So Wharton backs off and moves away from there. It only ends because sundown. It gets too dark to kill anymore. And so at the end of all of that, there's a surrender that's accepted from a guy named Juan Almonte. He's the only senior officer of Santa Anna's Army that's still around and has survived this point. He surrenders 250 of Santa Anna's soldiers, and that's the end of the fighting. There's about 600 dead men on the field. About 700 prisoners who are either captured right here or will be captured the next day or so. Santa Anna's Army has been destroyed. The question is, what happened to Santa Anna? All right? And Santa Anna had escaped all this carnage and had tried to get away as fast as he could. So Santa Anna, this is an actual picture of Santa Anna. I love this picture of Santa Anna. He had been, by his own account, sleeping when the battle broke out, like some of his men. He'd gone under a tree and he'd gone to sleep. It would have been somewhere right around this area right here. There is a persistent question and myth about what's often called the Yellow Rose of Texas, a woman who's often identified as Emily Morgan, who supposedly was distracting Santa Anna at the time of the battle itself. What do we know about this? We know there was no woman named Emily Morgan at the Battle of San Jacinto. There was, however, a woman named Emily West there. And so this is where history and mythology kind of cross each other as ships in the night, all right? Whoopsie. So there was a woman named Emily West. We do not have a picture of her, so this is just my stand-in picture to give you an example. I wanted to give you some sort of visual. But this is actually a guy named James Morgan, all right, who had gone, he's from Texas. He had gone to New York in the fall of 1835, and he had met a woman named Emily West in New York City. And in New York, so here's Manhattan. In New York, he had signed a contract with her where she would agree to be a housekeeper for him for a year for $100. And she'd come to Texas, so she was a free woman of color who came to Texas in the fall of 1835. She went to James Morgan's home, which is in the town of New Washington. You guys remember New Washington? Where Santa Anna's army begins up at some point. So she's in New Washington. Oh, by the way, I love this. This is her signature. All right, this is the only thing we have of her that we can identify specifically attached to her. But she ends up in New Washington, right over here, on April 16th, 1836, when Santa Anna's army marches in. So she is captured by Santa Anna's army. And she is, in fact, brought to San Jacinto. So she is somewhere over here at the time of the battle. But we have no information that would lead us to believe that she was distracting Santa Anna at the time of the battle. All right? That is something that became a big deal amongst historians in the 1950s and has become kind of mythology ever since. We have no documentation that says specifically Emily Morgan was doing any of that during the time of the battle. In fact, Santa Anna gets criticized by everybody after the war, by all of his officers. They would have loved to have said something like that in their criticisms, and none of them do. So it isn't to say we won't have more documents that come to light at some point, but that's what we have in terms of that. What we do know is that Santa Anna, as soon as he wakes up, realizes, oh no, we're in trouble. So he tries for like 10 seconds to organize a defense, doesn't work, and then he takes off and runs this way. Gets on a horse, I don't know how he got a horse, but he got a horse, jumps on that, and he's riding this direction, and he's heading for the Brazos River. You know why he's going for the Brazos River? Because the rest of his army, exactly, reinforcements, the rest of his army, the much bigger portion of his army is at the Brazos River. 2,500 soldiers are like 2 days away. If he can get to them, he can come back. If he comes back with a larger army, he's going to win. And this thing all goes a very different direction. So he rides as fast as he can. As he's doing this, he is being pursued by Texas cavalrymen who do not know that they're chasing Santa Anna. But they're right on his heels as fast as they can until they get to the bayou, which had been destroyed only hours earlier by the Texans. And when he gets to the bayou, Santa Anna can't get across. He's actually deathly afraid of water. I was like, why didn't he swim? But apparently he had a deathly fear of drowning. So Santa Anna jumps off his horse, hides in the woods right here, and somehow eludes the cavalry that are following him, and spends a horrible night hiding in the muck next to the bayou overnight. All right? The next morning, he is captured about 11 a.m. by a Texas patrol as they're rounding up people. They find him. They don't know it's Santa Anna, but he's brought back. And when he's brought back, he is identified because all of his soldiers, as soon as he's brought into camp, stand up and go, "El Presidente, Generalissimo." Yeah, well, actually, they did say shush. Several of them did say, his officers were like, "Stop talking." And they're like, "But it's the general. Hey." Anyway, so they quickly figure out who he is. He's brought to Sam Houston. This happens over near Buffalo Bayou. There's a wonderful surrender tree that is no longer there that was a part of all of this. But Santa Anna is now the capture. He's the captive of the Texas Army. And that's what makes San Jacinto, San Jacinto. The Texans had defeated a small portion of the Mexican army. It was by no means a decisive win. It was a decisive battle victory, but not a decisive win in the war, except that they captured the president of Mexico. And in so doing, they have the leverage they need to end the war itself. Because they send, as they do, they send letters to the rest of the Mexican army saying, you need to back out of here, and they do, and that's what ends the Texas Revolution. But more than that, I want to tell you guys something I think you guys mostly know, but I want us to marinate on it for a second. What happened here, and I mean literally where we're standing, all right, changes not just Texas, but North America in the biggest and most powerful ways there are. Because this battle means that Texas becomes independent of Mexico, and you have this 9-whole-year period where Texas is an independent republic, our own nation, that we like to remind the rest of the country all the time about, all right? Mexico never accepts that. And so when Texas joins the United States in 1845, it sparks a war. Really, actually, James K. Polk starts the war. But there's a war over the boundary of Texas that leads to a broader war between the United States and Mexico that brings in not just Texas, but all the land all the way to California. 530,000 miles, square miles of land. Enormous territory that draws the modern boundaries between the United States and Mexico that I don't need to remind you, we are still debating to this day, right? But all that territory completely changes the United States. It changes Mexico. And ultimately, the fate of this territory out here is what's going to lead to the American Civil War. All of that momentous change that we still feel to this day comes back to here. And specifically to here, actually, right here. Where we are, this ground we're standing on, and this battle, this unlikely battle, that could have gone any number of other directions, that its outcome changes so much is something that we need to appreciate more today. So thank you guys for listening to me. I really appreciate it.